Okay, so today's Daf Yomi is Kiddushin Daf Samachala, Kiddushin 61, dedicated for a Yeshua salvation for all of Klal Yisrael during this time of tremendous Eis Sarah, time of tremendous distress. So the Mishnah says on the bottom of Samachala Beis, if a person says, marry me, Amanas, Shieshli Beis Kor Afar, on the condition that I have in my possession a core of earth, which is an amount of earth, the condition that I have that amount of earth that it takes to grow a core's worth of food. So if he says that, she's going to be betrothed, on the assumption that he has it. On the condition that I have this core of earth in this specific place. If he has it in that place, she's betrothed to be in love and otherwise she's not. On the condition that I show you this core of earth, then he's betrothed and he has to show it to her. But she's betrothed and he has to show it to her. But if she doesn't have it, if he just shows it to her in the plains, then she's not going to be betrothed. So the Gemara says, why do we say that if he doesn't have the base core, that she's not betrothed? Why don't we have to be concerned? Maybe he has one, he just didn't show it to her. And furthermore, we weren't in the brisa. We have a different brisa which says that we have to be concerned that maybe he has it. And it says, yeah, to make sure that she's 100% betrothed, then he needs to show it to her. But just to have a suffix betrothed, to doubt whether it's betrothed, then then he doesn't need to show her because we could assume that it's a doubtful betrothal. So then the Gemara asks the question, why do we have this case? We have the same halacha which was taught in this Mishnah with respect to land, and then we had it earlier with respect to money. We had the same halacha taught in the previous Mishnah. Why do we need it to be taught in both places? And the Gemara explains we need to be taught in both places. We need to be taught in both places for the following reason. If it was just taught with respect to money, I would say Mishum Davide Inchi Dimitznai, because money, we may not know if he has it, so therefore we have to be concerned that he has it. But when it comes to land, we might have said we don't have to be concerned that he has the land if we don't see it, because people, if you have land, everybody knows who owns that house. It's not like money where people don't know about it. Kamash one, we say no, it's the same concern in both places. So then he says, on the condition that I have land in this place, if he has that land, she's betrothed. And Nor says, Pshita, isn't that obvious? And Nor says, no, he might have said, Amar La, that he says to her, what do you care where I have the land? My naf chamino, what do you care where I have the land? Ana tarachmi, my sana. I could just work harder and bring it to you. It doesn't matter where I bring you the wheat from. Mashma, no, it matters. Well, then the next case is he says, on the condition that I show you a beit kur offer, I show you this amount of earth. Tana won't escape no el rose Michel. No, he means not that he shows it during the plains. He has to show her what he really has, because that's what the intent of what he was saying is. Then it says if he shows her in the plains, it's not a valid betrothal. Now the Gemara is going to raise a question on this issue by first introducing something else. First of all, the Gemara says, what Shita, isn't this obvious? If he shows her in the plains, it's no good. The Gemara says, no, did not up b'distura. Now let's say he has that, but he owns it as part of a sharecropper. That's not going to be sufficient because that's not his. Now the Gemara introduces a discussion of hektish. So the Gemara says, with respect to somebody who consecrates something to the temple, gabe hektish, Tanan, we learned hamakdish sadeo b'shas hayovel, and if somebody consecrates his field in a time when the Jubilee year is in effect, that we're assuming that there is a law of the Jubilee year, and so therefore, and the law is on that during that time that every field that was every field that's an ancestral field, and if you dedicate to the temple, you could redeem it before the Jubilee year and get it back. And so there's an amount that you have to pay to redeem it, and that is based upon the Torah. It's Xeris HaKasav. And that amount is for each amount of field that produces a Chomer Sa'orim, which is a core, like we had discussed before, you pay a fixed amount of 50 shekel kesef. So therefore, the Gemara, the Mishnah in Bava Basra and in Erchin talks about the following case: Hamakdish Sadeo b'Shas Yovel. When a person consecrates his field during a time when the Jubilee year is in effect, no saying Bezerah Chomer Sa'orim, he gives on behalf of an area of field that he wants to redeem the amount that you're able to sow a Chomer of barley, which is a core. He pays for that. It's a fixed amount, Chamishim shekel kesef. And that's what he pays. He pays 50 shekel. V'hayu nikayim amukim asar tfachim usilayim gevoim asar tfachim. Let's say there is part of this field, this area, which can produce 50 which can produce a core of barley if it has ditches that are 10 tefachim deep or rocks that are 10 stones high, meaning that you can't work those areas. That's not measured as part of the area that you're redeeming because it produces a core of wheat that you're able to redeem for 50 shkalim. But rather, you have to measure that on its own. And so therefore, then you don't redeem that with the field. You have to pay for it separately to redeem it. Pachos mikam, but if it will be less than 10 tefachim deep or 10 tefachim high, then it would be part of the field that was redeemed. Nimdad dinimar. That will be part of the field that was redeemed. And the Gemara says, and we ask the question, okay, this field, this area, granted, you're saying that if it was too deep or too high, it wouldn't have been consecrated as part of the field. Okay, fine, I understand that. But nikdashu it should have become consecrated on its own, meaning to say, why don't we say that it also should be measured by this 50, that it should be able to be redeemed by 50 silver coins? Why don't we say according to the amount of Zerah Chomer that it produces? Why do we say that it's measured, that it's redeemed according to its own measure? Why do we say it doesn't fit under the rubric of this principle? So the Gemara explains, and if you want to say, and if you want to say that any amount of land that can produce a core's worth of field is not going to be considered to be redeemed according to this value, but it's redeemed according to its own value, not the 50 silver coins. And for that reason, the Mishnah says it's not measured because it's not of that value. If that's the case, we're aminu, but we have a contradictory source. And what is the contradictory source? The contradictory source states that it says in the Torah that if it's a sedei achuza, so if it's a field of inheritance, and the word sedei is extra because the Torah could have just said v'imei achuza so. Why did it say the word sedei? Because it says if a field produces a core's worth, it's redeemed with 50. I only know if this Zerah Chomer of barley was consecrated. I only know that if the person consecrated this amount. How do I know that if he consecrated less, or if he consecrated more, which is a sa'a or tarke v'chatzi tarke v'afilu rova? How do I know under all these cases that the redemption, that even though that we're going to say that the redemption is also 50 shkalim per core, tam omer sedei mikol makom. That means that even if it's a smaller field, we're going to say we've measured according to that value. So if that's the case, we see that there's explicit price, so that even if the land is smaller than this amount, that you still have to use that same formula in redeeming it. And so therefore, why do we say this is not measured with all your land that you're redeeming, which has ditches in it? So Gemara says, no, we're talking about that ditches that are filled with water, and therefore you can't plant in them at all. And so therefore, it's not going to be considered like a field, because the Torah, when it gave this law, was only referring to fields. And so therefore, that's why we're saying it's measured on its own. And Dekonami, the Katana Dumia the Slum, because it says in the Brisa rocks. And so therefore it's similar to tall rocks. So the Gemara says, well, then even if it's more than 10 tefachim deep, if it's filled with water, it can't be redeemed. So why do we say if it's less than 10 tefachim, we count it as part of the field? Gemara says, okay, you're right. We'll get to the questions at the end. Let me finish and we'll come back to the questions. The Gemara says, Hanu nagi da'ara mikru, those things that are less than 10 tefachim deep, and the stones that are less than 10 tefachim tall, they're called shidra da'ara mikru. So the ones that are less than 10 tefachim deep are called nagne da'ara, meaning to say they are called just bowls of the ground, and the stones are just called the projections of the earth. Meaning to say they're not considered like their own space. They have a name that attaches them to the earth. And so therefore we're going to view them as part of the earth. And the Gemara says, Gabe Mecher Tanan, with respect to a sale, we learn in the Mishnah, Omer Chavero, if a person says to his friend, it's a base core off. So this was the law with respect to Hektish, that we're going to say that those areas are excluded and calculated on their own. When it comes to a sale, if a person says, I'm selling you this amount of earth bait core, and he finds in it very tall stones or very deep ditches, we're not going to evaluate them, and we're going to measure the land as though it is without those rocks. But if they're less than 10 tefachim high or deep, nimdad dinima. We will measure it. And says Marufa Bar Chama, when it comes to a sale, we're going to say, even if they're not filled with water, meaning by hektish, we say, when do we exclude it? Only when they're filled with water. But when it comes to a sale, we exclude it even though they're not filled with water. And my time, and what's the distinction between the sale and the hektish? So somebody who's buying the field doesn't expect to buy a field with boulders in it that 10 tefachim high and with ditches in it that are 10 tefachim deep. So clearly that's going to be excluded. And the Gemara now asks the question with respect to hektish, with respect to betrothing a woman. If you say to a woman, I'm betrothing you on the condition that you have a field that's 50 core, and indeed the field it has these rocks in it that are tall or deep, do we measure, or ditches that are deep, do we measure that as though he gave her a field that's really 50 core? So the Gemara says, do we compare it to hektish and we say it's only excluded if it is filled with water, or do we compare it to a sale and say even if it's not filled with water, it's excluded? I think Gemara says it's more logical to say that it's compared to hektish to amar because the man could always claim I'm going to work very hard and I'll sow this field and I'll bring you the fruits. And so therefore, since the woman doesn't care if he gets it from the ditches or figures out how to remove the stones, so therefore there it's just results oriented, and then she's going to be betrothed in this case because he says I have a field that's going to produce this amount, and so I'll get rid of the ditches and then it'll work. Now we're up to the next Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Rabbi Meir says, Kol Tanai, She'eno Ketanai, B'nai Gad, U'B'nai Reuven, any conditional clause, which is not like the conditional clause of the sons of Gad and Reuven, Eno Tanai, is not a conditional clause. As it states, Vayomer Aleim If Ya'aru B'nai Gad, U'B'nai Reuven. Moshe said to them, if the sons of Gad and Reuven will cross over the Jordan, and then it says, V'im lo yavru chalutzim, if they will not cross over. So basically, let's take a step back. The sons of Reuven and Gad, they found land on the other side of the Jordan, and they said, we want to settle here. And Moshe Rabbeinu says, fine, you could settle here. After he spoke to God, he said you could settle here as long as you first cross over and be the vanguard of fighting for us. So therefore, but Moshe said, if you cross over, then you will be able to settle the land. But if you do not cross over, then you will not be able to settle the land. Then you're going to inherit in the land of Canaan. But he says, if you do cross over, then you will have the land of Gilad as inheritance. So every conditional clause has to have both elements in it. If you do this, you'll get this. And if you don't do this, you'll not get this. I just want to pause and say that when it comes to the conditional clauses, this also speaks very powerfully to what our responsibilities are as people who live outside the land of Israel. And since we live outside the land of Israel, we settled, so to speak, on the other side of the Jordan. We have a responsibility to be the vanguard, to be fighting on behalf of the land of Israel, to be spiritual soldiers, to be a voice, to be a voice of charity, to be giving charity, to be supporting the soldiers and the people of Israel in whatever way we can. That's a very clear message from this teaching from the Torah. And Chanina ben Gamliel says, no, that you can't learn from here that every condition or clause that you make has to list both sides to it, because Tzarech Hadavar La'omra, because Moshe Rabbeinu needed to say both elements. Shalmali came, because if he hadn't said both elements, he might have said, okay, if you cross over, you're going to get the land of Canaan. But if you don't cross over, we might have thought to say you won't get anything. And so we learn from here, if you don't cross over, you're going to get in the land of Canaan, but you wouldn't get elsewhere. So then the Gemara comes along and says, Shaper Kamarle Rebbe Chanina ben Gamliel Rebbe Meir. That Rebbe Chanina ben Gamliel has a good response to Rebbe Meir. There's a real reason why Moshe Rabbeinu needed to say what will happen if you don't cross over, that you're still going to get inheritance in the land of Canaan. So why can we learn from here about the conditional clause in general? So Amar Rebbe Meir responded, so no, because if your assumption was that Moshe Rabbeinu's statement was not to teach us this concept of a Tanai Kafel, then it could have written, if you don't cross over, you inherit amongst them in the land of Canaan. Excuse me, you inherit amongst you. But the fact that he adds the Eretz Canaan, why does he need to add that expression? We're on top of 61b. No, we learn from here a very simple point, that it's a Tanai Kafel, that he's coming to teach us this idea that every conditional clause that doesn't have both elements in it is not valid. Tanai Kafel Huda Asa. The Gemara says, Rebbe Chanina ben Gamliel's response to that on top of 61b is, no, the Torah needs to write the land of Canaan, because I would have thought, that I might have thought that they would receive a portion with the other tribes only in the land of Gilad, Aval Eretz Canaan, but in the land of Canaan, they wouldn't get anything. So therefore, the Torah is telling us in the land of Canaan that even if you don't help them in the land of Canaan, you're going to get with them a portion of those tribes. The Rebbe Meir's response was, B'tochachem kohecha de'islachu mashma. No, B'tochem means wherever you're going to inherit with them. Also, B'nai Gad and Reuben, and the Torah didn't need to specify it. So then the Gemara says that which Rebbe Chanina, the Gemara is going to explain that which Rebbe Chanina said with a mashal. Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, Amar Rebbe Chanina ben Gamliel, mashal ma'adavar domeh. What is a parable that explains this? If there's a person who was dividing up his assets to his children, and he says, Ploni b'ni yirash sada plonis. He says that my son will inherit this field after I die. Ploni b'ni yirash sada plonis, and this son will inherit this field. Ploni b'ni yitein masayim zuz v'yirash sada plonis. My third son will give to his brothers 200 zuz, and he will inherit this field. Vim lo yitain, and if he doesn't give this 200 zuz, yiresh imachav b'shar nachasim, then he will divide up everything else, all the other assets, with his brothers. So he explains, Mi garam lo, who is causing the third son, liyaresh im achav b'shar nachasim, to be able to inherit with the other assets. Kefelu garam lo, the conditional clause that was doubled, meaning to say, at first the father says you should give 200 zuz, and he'll inherit the third field. And you might have thought that if he doesn't fulfill this condition, he'll divide up with his brothers only the third field, but he wouldn't receive a portion of the first two fields, and so for sure he wouldn't receive a portion of the third field. And so therefore, when he doubles it, we see that if he doesn't give the 200 zuz with his brothers, he'll divide up also the other assets, and so that's also what Moshe Rabbeinu said. So Gemara says, "V'lo damya mashal masnis." And this parable is not all similar to our Mishnah. Hasam Katani, there in our Mishnah, we learned that if it wasn't a conditional clause, Yesh b'mashma shafilu b'eretz Canaan, it would have implied that he wouldn't, even the land of Canaan, he wouldn't inherit. So Alma Kfela, Eretz Gilad Nami Ma'ani. So we see from here that the doubling teaches us that he also inherits the land of Gilad, because without that doubling, we would have thought that he wouldn't inherit anything, not in Gilad and Canaan. V'hacha ketani, and in this brayso, Rabbi Chanina is saying, "Mi garmo yarish achav b'shanachas," and what's allowing the brother to inherit? Kafelu garmo, only the fact that he inherited it. Alma kafelu ashar nachasim hu dekamahani. So we see from here the doubling also helps that he divides up the assets with the brothers, also the two fields that he received, but not in the third field, which he would have divided with them, even if his father hadn't explicitly stated it. So therefore, it's not a direct parallel to the case of the Mishnah. The Gemara says, no, Lokasha, Hamik made the name Meir no chazu. So the teaching of Rav Chanina is our Mishnah that without the kfelus, without the doubling, that they wouldn't have a portion, that was taught before that Rabbi Meir said that the Torah could have just said the word v'no chazu. And the Rabbi Chanina and the Mashal and the Brayso, so that was said after he said that. Where it says, but Bishlam Rabbi Meir, Hainu Dechsev, it makes sense according to Rabbi Meir, who says that from the fact that it says that they would inherit, we say that if they don't do this, they wouldn't have inherited it. That's why it states with respect to our parsha. It says in this week's parsha, we're going to read tomorrow. It says in Kayin Kel Tevel, Im Teitiv Seis, if you will, basically that after that, when that Kayin brings he brings his carbon to Hashem, and he wants to know why it wasn't accepted. And Hashem says to him, if you do a good carbon, it'll be accepted. And then he has to say, and if you don't do a good carbon, the sin is ready to crouch at the door. And so since if he hadn't, according to Rameir, it makes sense why he needs to say it double, because if he wouldn't have doubled it, we would have said, hold on. If it wouldn't have doubled it, we would have said, if it wouldn't have doubled it, we would have thought that he wouldn't take, he just wouldn't get any reward. So that's what he said. Not only will he not get, if he doesn't give a good punishment, if he doesn't give a good carbon, not only will he not get a good reward, it's going to be a sin. El Rebbe Chanina, who says that the opposite. He says, why would we need to say it? We would have anyway known that if he doesn't do it, he's going to get the sin. So the Gemara says, no, he might have thought that if you do good, you'll get the reward. But if you don't do good, you don't get the reward, and also you don't get punished. Kamash Moan, no. So we see from here that if you don't do good, you're also going to be punished. Another example. That's why it makes sense to according to Rabbi Meir. That's why it says, with respect to when Avram sent his servant to find a wife for Isaac, he makes him take an oath, and he also does a double expression there. He says, he says that if you don't find somebody from my family, you'll be free from my oath. And then it states, if you don't, so and you'll come when you come to my family, and if they don't give somebody to you, then you'll be free from my oath. Because if he wouldn't have doubled it according to Rabbi Meir, we would have said that the oath applies to Elazar, even if he fulfilled the condition. But El Reb Chanina ben Gamliel Lamrei, so the Gemara says it's just sakadei tachamina. You might have thought, where we might have thought where the woman herself wants to marry Yitzchak, then but their whole family doesn't want to do it. That he'd be able to bring her against their will. And if he doesn't do that, then the oath will take a place. Kamash Muam, we see from here that Avram was saying, then you will be free from my oath. And if they will not give it to you, you'll also be free. That if the family doesn't want to do it, then you'll be free from the oath. That's what he's saying here. So then the Gemara says, so since the Gemara is talking about the oath of Abraham, according to Rabbi Chanina, the Gemara says another verse that relates to that. Another verse that relates to that. And what is that? It says, Isha, the woman doesn't want. What's the chiddush from that expression? The Gemara says, it's true. We need it. You might have thought, where it was good, where the family wants Yitzchak to marry, and the woman herself doesn't want it, we could bring her against her will. Kamash Muan, that is teaching us that if the woman doesn't want it, that if she didn't want to come, if Rivka didn't want to come, the oath won't take effect. Where it says Bishlam Rabbi Meir, it makes sense according to Rabbi Meir. It says if you follow in my ways, you'll be blessed. And if you don't follow, you'll be cursed. Because since the Torah says the brachos, if you fulfill the mitzvos, we don't know what will happen if you don't fulfill them. Gemara says, I'll tell you why. It's true. So you might have thought, if you follow my ways, you get a blessing. If you don't follow them, you're not a blessing or a curse. And therefore, it teaches us that if you don't go in my ways, Hashem will curse you. Another attempt to do it, the Gemara says, Bishlamo Rabbi Meir says, according to Rabbi Meir, this will be the last one we do. He says, it says in the verse that Isaiah says to Jewish people, Im tovu shmatem. If you desire and you listen, then you'll eat from the good of the land. And if you reject it, you won't. Why does it need to double it? Gemara says, it's true. If you eat it, it will be good. If you desire the mitzvahs and you listen to Hashem, it will be good. You get nothing. No, if you don't listen, you get punished. So since the Gemara cites this verse from Yeshaya, the Gemara says, how to explain this curse? My charav tuach, or what does it mean that they will eat swords? It's impossible. Amarava teaches us milcha gilanita unahama desaria kusha ubetzoli de amarmar pas purni chariva b'melch betzolim kasham laguf charivos. So it teaches us that if you have very coarse salt or barley bread and onions and very dry bread, that's going to be bad for your body like swords. So that means to say that that's what it means when you're eating swords. I just want to say before we go to David's question, I just want to share with everybody